Hey everyone, this is Robert, and thank you for tuning in to the podcast. It's the first day of May, and we're gonna kick things off with another interview. Who figured? But we have somebody in the corner who's been in the industry for a while. We have Mr. Peter Ackerman, and yeah, there's a lot to discuss, and at least for the 30 or 40-ish minutes that we have here today. So, regardless, thank you for joining me, and yeah, my first question, how are you doing on this lovely afternoon?
I am doing well. I live now on the East Coast after having been born and raised in Southern California, but I'm doing well. Hope you're well too.
Of course. So would you like to give like a little quick everything that you've been up to these days so we could get to yeah, because I know that we're just still, mostly staying inside and keeping active and doing all this business like stuff. So yeah, I want to know what you've been up to as of late.
Well, yeah, me personally. So I was. I'll give you the overall view of my history as a way of saying how I'm doing now.
Okay.
I grew up as the son of two people who were instrumental in classic television. My dad, who died in 1991, is an executive producer of shows like Bewitched and The Flying Nun and Gidget and Leave It to Beaver, the first season. My mother is an actress, and I know my mother's history a lot better. Her name is Eleanor Donahue, and she was on a show in the late 50s called Father Knows Best. And also, she was Andy Griffith's girlfriend on the first season of The Andy Griffith Show and has done tons of work on television. I followed in their footsteps. I did a little bit of acting, I think, in the 80s, and that's when it ended. And then I got into production and worked on commercials, music videos, and then in television, but always in administrative roles. I was never creative. And that brings some confusion because when I left television after I worked a couple of seasons on Friends, um, I moved out of Warner Brothers, if you will, and another fella moved in with my name. So I don't want to confuse your listeners. I am not the Peter Ackerman who is the executive producer of The Americans or who produced Ice Age. But I am the Peter Ackerman who's related to classic television icons. And so part of my reason for leaving television is that I promised my mother if ever something else got my attention is to follow that and get out of the crazy TV industry. And I began to feel a call to something else and something that we're not going to go into depth here because I don't want to scare your listeners away. But I am an Episcopal priest, and I started following the call that I started to feel into moving into the Episcopal priesthood. And we can be married, and I am. My wife and I have two adult children, one who still lives with us, and we get to find our own jobs in the Episcopal Church. And I found this great historic parish in a small little town in Maryland. And that's where I am. And this is where I'm going to be staying for a long while, I hope. And so I'm very happy. And that's how I am. Hope that it's a nice little roundup of everything there.
Yeah. So getting into the television industry, that because you mentioned both of your parents were highly instrumental in classic TVs, and that's pretty much how you got your start into the industry, into showbiz.
Well, I guess yes, yes. I remember my first. I mean, I had lots of starts. I mean, I would go to the set. I've been to the set of Bewitched. My dad knew I was a fan of Batman, so as a boy, he took me to the set of Batman. He didn't produce Batman, but he knew the producer. So I got to see behind the scenes from a very young age. And I remember I was probably 5, 6, 7 years old, somewhere in there. My parents had what you'd call something they didn't do a lot. They weren't typical Hollywood folks, but at this one point, they hosted at the house this big Hollywood party, and there were stars there were sports figures there, and I'm just walking around with all these quote unquote beautiful people. And I walked into a conversation that was going on. I was allowed to stay up late that night. And some guy who had just written a book about exploring Africa and studying pygmies in Africa, was talking about his book. And I just thought this world that I was in that evening was so fascinating, with real explorers and stars and sports players. I remember one LA Rams guy was there. And I remember saying to myself, this is the world I want to be in. This is what I'm going to do with my life. And so when I could at school, I would try out for plays, and just got my foot wet. My parents were against putting any of their children into acting, so we had to do it on our own, basically. But that's how I got my start and how I got my interest. And frankly, even though I did plays in college and all that, my first paying role, it's good old nepotism. They talk about Nepo babies today, and I have to reluctantly admit I'm one of them. My dad was doing a TV movie called Gidget's Summer Reunion, which became his final series called The New Gidget. And in Gidget's Summer Reunion, I was cast as a surfer with lines, and that's what got me my Screen Actors Guild card at the time and everything else. But I eventually got some parts on my own. But that's how I got started in show business.
Right on, man. So after you got your start, that just sort of opened a lot of doors for you, like when it comes to acting and, a bunch of the other shows and, getting to know all of these people. I think that's kind of how, they call it the snowball effect. So that's pretty much how where the everything just kind of all started for you. Um,
Yeah.
and it just continued from there. Do you have like any particular like anecdotes or fond memories of like, getting to work with, your parents or even with the other um, with your colleagues and friends on all of these projects that you've done over the years?
Oh, I've got so many memories, and I'm working on a manuscript with a collaborator, and been working on it for a few years. And it's been kind of difficult collaborating with somebody when we live in separate areas, and I work a full-time job. And but it's coming together, and I think before the end of this year we're going to have it into our agent, and we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, it's all full of anecdotes. So um gosh, where to start? I think my first anecdote would have to be my first visit to a set, and it was Batman, as I already told you. And it was at 20th Century Fox Studios, and my dad and mother took me. And why I remember this part of the day, I was also a Monkees fan, and we were supposed to go see the Monkees on their stage. And when we got to the studio, they used to have these wooden guardrails. That's how they kept people out, our cars out, just these simple guardrails that the security guard would lift when he saw that you were approved to come in. And the guardrail was broken off and it was on the ground. And my dad asked the security guard what happened. And he said, oh, that guy, Peter from the Monkees, couldn't wait for me to lift it up. So he drove through the gate because we had a pass. My mother turned to my father and also looked over the back seat at my older brother and I and said, I don't think we're going to the Monkees set today. And darn it, that I never got to that set, but I did get later on in my life backstage to a Monkees concert, so it all worked out. But went to the Batman set that day, and they were filming an episode called Hot Off the Griddle. And I remember while watching Adam West and the fella who plays Robin on this giant hot plate hopping around, I was actually standing in the set for Wayne Manor. And for fans of that show, they'll know there's a bust of Shakespeare that opens up, and there's a red button for the elevator. And I got to, that was all already open, including the elevator shaft. And I got to look down it, and there was no bat cave down below. That's where I first understood the magic of television, is that nothing is connected. So I looked down this shaft at where the bat cave should be, and it was just about a 6-foot drop with a bunch of pillows down there. And so but rather than spoiling the illusion, I just was in on the secret, and I loved I just loved it. And that's probably what started my love for the industry. Um, I can jump to Bewitched because I went to that set a lot. And our family was close with Elizabeth Montgomery and her husband, who was the main director of Bewitched and also the producer, Bill Asher. And we were so close that we Ackerman boys, I'm one of four boys, we called Bill and Elizabeth Montgomery Uncle Bill and Aunt Liz. That's how close we were. And so I remember my favorite anecdote, which I just shared on a Bewitched documentary that's on Reels, was I was at the set one day when Elizabeth Montgomery was playing not only Samantha, but she was also playing her twin cousin, Serena. And Serena looked much different than Samantha. Hair color was different and dress was different. And she was made up for Serena. And she acted like Serena, which was a kind of a wild, wacky hippie chick. And I didn't know that it was Aunt Liz. And so Serena walked up to me and she said, she got down on her haunches and said, "So, who are you, little boy?" And I told her, "I'm Peter Ackerman. My dad's the executive producer, Harry Ackerman." And she leaned in and said, "What's the star of this show really like?" And I said, "Oh, she's really nice," which I now realize was the correct answer because I didn't know it at the time, but I was talking to the star of the show. So that's just a couple of anecdotes from my days visiting early television.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, what were some of the other shows that you definitely grew up like that you were raised? When it comes to early television and whatnot. Mainly the shows that you would probably watch on like TV Land or Decades. I think that's the channel. But yeah, any other ones that come to mind?
Well, I was on probably most every show that I was alive for that my dad did, for sure, I was on the set. So The Flying Nun, which starred Sally Field. I think the only time I was on the set where both my parents were working, because that was rare, they didn't always work together. My mom would occasionally get cast on one of my dad's shows, and the only one I was alive for that I'm recalling, no, there were two, but the first one was The Flying Nun. And so that starred Sally Field. And my mother was cast as Sally's older sister, and I think appeared in 4 episodes of the series that went, I think, 2 seasons. And so one day I went to the set and uh, to see my mom at work, and of course my dad was usually at the set as well if I was there. So that's just one of the sets I visited. No big anecdote from that one. And then a fun one, and then I'll tell you a fun one, and then I'll tell you one that would have been a lot of fun, but I spoiled it. The fun one was The Odd Couple. So in the 70s, there's a show called The Odd Couple, and my mother co-starred on the series as Miriam, who was the girlfriend of one of the two guys in The Odd Couple. And so I would sometimes go to The Odd Couple set. I didn't go at the time when Beatle John Lennon came to the set, and my mother met him and got his autograph for me. But just going on the set of The Odd Couple was fun because it was a very creative set, and the people were nice, and it was always just fun to see a run through. And now I'll go to the time I regret not going to the set with my mother. So Gary Marshall, who was a director, producer, and an actor, he cast my mom frequently in some of his movies. And she was cast for a small part in this movie. And I was an adult at this time and wasn't living at home, but my mother, I think, missed. I used to go to the sets with my mother. And even when I didn't go to the sets with her, I would rehearse her scripts with her. And I think she wanted me to go for that latter reason, to just kind of help her with her lines. And I was probably in my early 20s. And she said, "Hey, Peter, do you want to go to the set with me? It's on a Sunday." And I said, "Oh, on a Sunday? That's a weird time to film." And she goes, "Well, they had to close down Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. They're filming this Gary Marshall movie, and I've been cast as this sales lady. And it's just a short, small part in the movie, but I'd love to have you come with me, keep me company." And I just kind of decided, Sunday, I wasn't doing churchy things then. So my Sunday was free, but I just kind of thought, Sunday morning I can sleep in. No, I'm not going to go to the set with my mom. But I said, who's in the scene with you? And she goes, some actress, I forget her name. She was just in this movie called Mystic Pizza. And I had not seen this movie called Mystic Pizza. So I had no idea that she was filming a scene with Julia Roberts and that the movie was Pretty Woman. And I keep thinking, what if single young Peter Ackerman had gone to the set with my mom and had met single Julia Roberts? Who knows? Probably nothing would have happened, but it's still one of those things I like to think about. And the one set I wish I had gone with my mom on was Pretty Woman.
Oh man, that must have been amazing.
Yeah.
Like, um, getting because how I see it, I've talked to previous guests about this, but it just when it comes to the classic golden age, like the classic TV, like television that we used to watch, like MASH, Mary Tyler Moore, the Laugh-In stuff, Dick Van Dyke, and a lot of the shows that my parents, when they were kids, and they used to really enjoy and watch. And I know that these shows that we've been um, from the 60s and 70s and so on and so forth, like you could watch it from any age and you could still enjoy them, like in all ages type of, content, which is kind of the same when it's like you watch like, your Saturday morning shows like Looney Tunes or Rocky and Bullwinkle and those, um, all of those shows that used to air on television, but we're still, getting, I mean, we're still seeing Looney Tunes now and Rocky and Bullwinkle. We're still seeing, clips on YouTube and we're still appreciating, like, the shows that we used to watch as kids. And, you can still enjoy them. There's a lot of enjoy. You can still very much get invested in them when you get older, like as adults. So I think that's the magic of why these shows still hold up as well as they have, all these years, even years after they, went off the air. But
Yeah.
we still love them regardless.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the magic that you talk about is quite a surprise because back when my dad was making TV shows, nobody thought they were going to last. Um,
Yeah.
they were made, they were considered products. So back when my dad was doing, name a TV show, there was always a sponsor because a sponsor helped um, provide the budget so you could make the show. So it would be, might be a dishwashing liquid or some hamburger place or something would be the sponsor of the show. And my dad always saw those shows as products. I'm making a product, and so he would produce the product. And he would work with the studio executives and the sponsor and make sure that everything was in the product that everybody wanted. But when the show was over or the product was done, it was on to the next product. And where that didn't work out so well financially for my family was my dad was at Screen Gems at the time, and Bewitched was doing so well. And the people at Screen Gems at Columbia, it was Columbia Television, said to my dad, would you like to take less pay in your contract and we'll give you partial ownership of the show Bewitched? We'll give you points towards ownership. And they talked about maybe someday there'll be this thing called cable and people can watch any show they want at any time. And my dad just wasn't that far seeing. He just couldn't see it. And as a boy, he had grown up in the Depression and he didn't believe in risking money. He wanted the pay that they would give him now. Well, fast forward, we know that cable became a thing and that these shows were not forgotten. They weren't forgotten when they were over. They still live today, as you said. And so while he was alive, that director and producer of Bewitched, Bill Asher, had taken points in the show. And he was handing out $20 tips wherever he went until he died a few years ago. And my dad struggled because my dad didn't gamble. And That too bad for us, though. If I was a millionaire kid, I probably would have killed myself by now somehow. And um, it just shows you that it's a nice surprise. And people your age, Robert, you probably might not have known that back in those days, people thought these shows were one and done, and that was it. They didn't realize they would have the lasting effect that they do.
Yeah. Going back to what I said earlier with the Looney Tunes, like, the Warner Brothers, like they used to show them like before movies. They were kind of considered like they were just sort of like the appetizer to like the features that were being played. Like if you're watching Casablanca or I don't know, any name 40s or 50s um movie here. Like the cartoons used to be shown before, when you were watching a movie, and now they're like, oh my gosh, like animation is totally like something that can be just as well, just as respected, and like people can really they love this stuff. Animation can be seen as like a true like art form and is something that can be taken as seriously as live action. So and
Who
it's
knew?
it's funny how time, how we progressed, with technology and all this other stuff that's been going on. So it's just funny how, our viewpoints can change over the last like almost an entire century at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk about cartoons. I'll take a half step out. The Three Stooges. The Three Stooges shorts were made pretty inexpensively in comparison to other filmed projects. They would find a set of a Mexican city that was for another movie, and they'd say, and they knew it would still be up for a week, so they'd say, oh, let's make a quick script around this Mexican city, and we'll film something. And the Three Stooges shorts, like the cartoons, were really just to fill out the time, because they knew that when people went to the movies, and movies were closer to 90 minutes then, that you kind of had to get like a 2 hour block. And so they'd throw in a cartoon, they'd throw in a short, they'd throw in some previews, and you had 2 hours there. And it was kind of a throwaway thing. And so definitely the Three Stooges were considered throwaway entertainment at the time. And nobody knew that today, people would still be watching the Three Stooges. And there you go.
Exactly. So, yeah, we could just discuss about your production days, doing music videos. You've talked about doing TV shows, but
Yeah.
yeah, we can talk more in depth about, doing music, Friends, where you were, the assistant to the line producer. So yeah, we could just, talk about, you could just share about, your time being on
Yeah.
Friends and doing music, and why not? Talk
Yeah.
about all this other good stuff that you did.
Yeah, how about I'll tiptoe to Friends, and that way I'll go
Okay,
sequentially in my life. So I tried being an
sure.
actor for a while, and did the actor thing, but really all I was doing is waiting tables most of the time, and getting a day part here, a day part there. And one day, while my dad was doing his last series called The New Gidget, he had, I can't remember if he had back surgery or knee surgery, and he couldn't drive. So he needed a driver for a couple of weeks. And he asked me if I'd be his driver. So I took a break from the restaurant, and I became his driver, and went to all the aspects that an executive producer goes to behind the scenes. And so I got to go to the set, of course, and then I got to go to casting sessions and watch casting sessions. I got to go to editing sessions. So I suddenly saw everything. And that's the first time something other than acting started to pull at me. And I thought, oh, I like this production thing. Unfortunately, my dad didn't have any pull by the time his show ended, and then he died a year or so after. So I was on my own, but I found out the way to get started is to try to become a production assistant, which is the entry level position. And I found some people who were willing to take a risk on a new fella. And so I started working production assistant work in commercials. And that was pretty much tied to music videos, because a commercial production assistant would work as little as one day, not usually more than 2 weeks per project. And the same was with music videos. And so sometime after I started working on commercials, my name got out there that I was a good production assistant, and I got called to work on the music video "Express Yourself" with Madonna. And it was, production assistant works a lot of running around, a lot of getting in your car to go do an errand for somebody. Sometimes it's just sweeping up on the stage, and so that was a massive production. If you watch on YouTube "Express Yourself" by Madonna, that was a massive production. And then right after that, I got to do the music video "Janie's Got a Gun" with the band Aerosmith, and I got to drive some of the band to the set. I picked them up at their hotel and took them to the set. And then the coolest part for me is the director wanted to do a run through with camera and lights, and the lead singer, Steven Tyler, wasn't prepared at the moment, but the rest of the band was. So he got the rest of the band on stage, and he picked me, because I had nothing to do, to stand in for Steven Tyler. So I got to do a whole run through of "Janie's Got a Gun" to the recording, of course, not my own voice, but I got to stand at Tyler's microphone and move my lips to the song while the rest of the band around me continued to play. And as an Aerosmith fan, as a classic rock fan, I was in heaven. I got to be the lead singer of Aerosmith for 5 minutes, and that was cool. Eventually, I wanted to get into television, and an opening came at Warner Brothers for on a TV show called The Human Target, which didn't last long. This was around 91. And I did that. And then I was a production assistant on a TV movie on Frank Sinatra for about 6 months. And then I got hired to work in the main production department at Warner Brothers. So I was still basically a production assistant, but for the bunch of vice presidents. And I would sometimes get farmed out to help on various shows. And so I worked on Full House as a helper writer's assistant for a while. And then eventually I became a production coordinator, which is sort of the middle person between the production office and the studio. And so I was the production coordinator for the Wayans brothers on that first season of that show. And then I had a friend who I knew from the Warner Brothers work I had been doing, and his name was Todd Stevens, and he was the line producer on Friends. And season 1 had concluded, and his assistant left, and he needed an assistant. So he said, "Hey, Petey, would you come on and be my assistant on Friends for not for 2 seasons, for season 2?" And so I said, yes, definitely. I went from the last place show in the ratings to the #1 show in the ratings. And so that was a move up for me. And Friends was great. I didn't make it to the set a lot, except on show nights when we were filming. But in the office, I got to see the writers at work, got to hear how the stories were going, got to see over the course of a week how the story would change. And that was just great. And then going down to the set was a treat. Seasons 2 and 3 were great. I finally got to meet Julia Roberts, and Tom Selleck that's when he began to be a guest actor on the series. And again, a classic rock fan, I got to meet Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders when she guested on the series. So that was just great. And so another bit of the sets I went to and the people I met right there.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned like what you're doing nowadays. How would you say that this whole new COVID pandemic lifestyle, how has it affected, I guess, if not your personal life, how has it affected your work ethic and, your professional stuff?
Well,
Uh,
I'll tell you how it affected my profession. I was in a church in Lodi, California. So I was back in California for a while, at a church when COVID hit. And the problem is every church is different, every diocese is different. A diocese is how do I say this? I'm acting like you know what a diocese is. A diocese is the area of a denomination. So the Episcopal Church in Lodi, it was in the Diocese of San Joaquin. And so over that diocese is a bishop, and the bishop decided how we were going to do worship during COVID, and all the churches agreed to it. So we began having people stay at home, but we had to learn how to broadcast. Well, broadcasting was kind of my background. And even though I had to learn new things, because I didn't know anything about Zoom and I didn't know anything about editing segments or anything like that, but I learned quickly. So COVID made me busy. While a lot of people took breaks and had little mini vacations or staycations at home, I got busy. But I was able to bring my showbiz background into it. And as an actor, I learned when you're doing a commercial, for instance, which I never did, but I took a commercial acting class. I understood how to talk to a lens, how to look into a lens and talk so that it looks like you're talking to the people at home. And I was able to use that in my church service. As ever, the son of entertainers, I learned as a boy how to do ventriloquism with a puppet. So when I had to do children's sermons on video, what do? You bring out a puppet and do a little ventriloquism show. Since you don't have the children to interact with, you interact with the puppet. So I learned how to do that. So COVID really brought out my inventiveness. And it was really because my wife, in what she does, which has nothing to do with show business, she got a job offer back east where we had been for a number of years. And we decided it was time to go back east. So that's why we moved to Maryland, and that's where I am now in Southern Maryland. So that's my COVID experience.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to talk about? Like any upcoming, like if you want to promote anything or plug, if you have like any last minute or like last like closing stuff that you want to,
Like we
share,
got
like
20
yeah.
seconds according to my screen. I would just say, look for a book by me. I don't know what it's going to be called yet. Probably wouldn't be out in at least 6 months, if not a year, if even then. But look for my name, Peter Ackerman, or probably be Peter K. Ackerman, and a book on show business and growing up in classic TV. Look for that in the future.
Righty, yeah. Any last piece of advice that you want to close us out on?
Follow your dreams. That's what my mother had told me. My mother had said to me, when I told her I wanted to be an actor, and she said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure." She said, "What?" She says, "I'll support you in that, but just promise me this: the minute you find you want to do something else, the minute you find something that gives you equal joy that acting does, go do that." And that advice has never served me wrong, because when I realized that there was something out there besides friends calling me for a vocation, and I discovered what that was, my mother wasn't wrong. She knew best. Follow your heart, follow your joy.
Right on. Um, Let me see. Any social media like where people can find you, like where can
I'm
we
not.
check out?
Yeah, nothing to check out. I'm sure if this book gets published, if this manuscript gets published, I'll have to have a website for it and everything else. That's sort of the norm today. No, if you want to find me, you can look for me on the usual social media pages, Instagram and Facebook. Search me by my name, including the middle initial, because I try to separate myself from the famous producer Peter Ackerman. So I'm Peter K. Ackerman, and I can usually be found there. And um, feel free to add me as a friend if you want to send me a little message to let me know that you're adding me. That's always helpful. That I know you're not a bot. Um, and you can just kind of see what I'm up to today. And if you're ever in Southern Maryland, look up a historic church called Christ Church in a little city called Chaptico, and you'll see me there as the priest. So look me up there.
Yeah. Any last words, like an outro or anything? Or have we pretty much covered
I'm trying to
everything?
think. I've never had an outro before. It's like a friend of mine does a podcast, and he's got an outro that's like "Saddle Up and Ride" or something like that, because it's about Western fiction. But no, I'd say I'll do this as my outro. Never forget, you are loved, and go find your joy. There you go.
Right on. So
All right.
yeah, thank you so much for watching. This shall be going up. It should hopefully be like sometime in the this upcoming week. We'll see, depending on my scheduling, but I'll do my best. It's been kind of out of whack lately, so but yeah, thank you for watching this, and yeah, be sure to check out more of my stuff if you want to see any of my other interviews that I've done, like Spotify, YouTube. Definitely check them out. They'll be in the description once this goes up. But otherwise, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all next time. This is Robert Jackson signing out. And until then, toodaloo. Later.